Good morning, everyone. Welcome back. Good morning, Hind and Linda, Molly. Good to see some faces, Isabella and Linda. We're still looking at this. Whoops, what'd I do? Let me bring that back. This strange phenomenon, starting with the split brain, where you've also seen what I have to say about hemispherectomies in the WADA test. And now we have craniopagus twins. I'll put that in the chat. Craniopagus. They are joined at the cranium, but it appears that their brains have a neural connection. And they call this a thalamic bridge. So the thalamus is a midbrain subcortical structure, and it looks like there's a bridge between one thalamus and the other. And we do know that there's some motor control. You have two brains, but one brain might control partially limbs in what you would call the other body contralaterally. We know that. We also know that the family and their doctor believe that they can sense things going back and forth. And although it doesn't look like this has been clinically tested, um, they have tested with imaging brain activity. So they would stimulate one brain, and the other brain would have a correlative response. I was going to play the rest of this video, but are there questions or thoughts? I encourage you to ask yourself, let's suppose that this is true. Okay, so let's watch just a little bit. I'm going to share the sound and set it up for video sharing. Here we go.
Hi, how are you?
To demonstrate, Mum Felicia covers Krista's eyes and places a stuffed toy in front of Tatiana. Despite her eyes being covered, Krista can still see the pig.
Krista, what's Mommy holding?
A piggy.
That's right, Mommy's holding the piggy.
Goodness me. Here's how it works. The girls have completely separate brains and personalities, but their brain stems are connected by what's called a thalamic bridge. The thalamic bridge is like a high-speed optic fibre, and in their case, it appears to be a two-way highway. Thoughts, feelings, ideas can cross this bridge and into the other brain.
They still have functioning full brains on each side, connected by this robust thalamic bridge that allows information of all manner to cross.
So they're plugged in, essentially.
It's like you've got two independent television sets, okay? But there's a cable that's running between the two of them. And even though you can watch channel 2 over here and you can watch channel 4 over here, every once in a while, this one can turn on the station that this one is watching and tune into it.
That looks really tasty.
Thoughts or questions? Notice that when one twin, I don't know which one it is, says piggy, she says it questioningly, like Joe when looking at the cat, or the image that is drawn, when the left hemisphere is looking at the image drawn by the right hemisphere. Joe's the split brain patient, of course, or like Sarah Scott when she writes down the word aphasia and can't produce it verbally but can read it aloud. What experience might this twin be having? It's not a clear-cut visual experience. Otherwise, she would respond like a child responds when you show them a piggy and without question. So assuming that there's some kind of information being transferred, it's, I think, interesting to ask, what would that be like, right? It seems to be vague or a little abstract, like maybe the idea of a pig enters her mind without actually having a visual experience of it, what might that be like? Certainly, we can recall things. And so I can ask you questions like, what color is your pillowcase? And a color comes into your mind or a pattern, right? You're not looking at it, it doesn't obscure your vision, but suddenly that information becomes available. So it might be something like that, or it's like recalling the piggy doll without actually seeing it. And we've seen just more broadly with the split brain case, we've seen a bunch of interpretations. So Gazzaniga back in the 1980s thought there's just one conscious center in the brain. He thinks it's the left hemisphere, or more strictly the language producing hemisphere, whether that's the left or the right. It varies by person. And his reason for this was that he thought that consciousness requires some linguistics, some ability to form a theory about yourself. Uh, so he's got a kind of a higher level notion of consciousness in mind. He's not thinking about just the raw phenomenal consciousness that most of us believe not only humans have, but also many animals. But in the 1980s, he thinks it's the language dominant hemisphere, which is conscious. It pulls together a story about the self, who you are, what you represent, what happened to you, what you're going to do, etc. And we saw V.S. Ramachandran, who thinks that in the split brain case, you have two independently conscious hemispheres, two spheres of consciousness. You saw that I accept that, but I go further, and I think that even in a intact brain where it's not split, you have independent consciousness, and it's important to see that that's not to say that they're cognitively independent. They're cognitively quite dependent on each other. Uh, they interact constantly and seamlessly, but they're in terms of consciousness, they're independently conscious. So that's my view, admittedly strange, counterintuitive. And what else? Oh, and then we saw Richard Swinburne, who says, well, there's one conscious entity, but it can't be a material thing. We know everything there is to know about the material facts, and those facts do not answer the question of how many people there are. But he thinks there is a question of how many people there are. And so that must be resolved by something immaterial. He is an unabashed dualist who believes in an immaterial soul that is in causal interaction with some region of the brain. Okay, so those are different interpretations of just the split brain phenomena, and I include this because you might think that being the left hemisphere under certain conditions is in some ways like being Tatiana, one of the twins, right? In neural connection with another brain. Okay. Well, I haven't seen any hands come up or seen anything in the chat. So I'm going to give it a little more time in case people have questions. Oh, and I brought this up last class, I believe. So a class or two prior, one of you asked, how do the hemispheres sync up, or what's a theory about that? And when you said synchronize, um, I thought you were talking about neural synchronicity. I thought you were talking about the neuron synchronizing. And so I gave an answer to that. But I realized later you're probably just asking, why is it that it seems like there's just one experience? Like, how is it that the hemispheres um, collaborate so as to have what appears to be a unified experience? Actually, a lot of us write on that. So I've written on that. Uh, and there are philosophers in the philosophy of mind who have written on this. And so, if that's your question, then there's a pretty large literature now under the heading "Unity of Consciousness." What explains the unity of consciousness? So you can start there. Okay. Well, I'm not hearing anything. This usually generates a lot of discussion. Oh, there we go. Yasmin, go ahead.
Hi, I'm sorry. I I logged in about a minute or two late, so I
Mhm.
remember this. We started watching this video last class, and I just
Mhm.
want to make sure I didn't miss anything pertinent. So I understand that the twins share a thalamic bridge, correct?
Mhm.
And so, and they're demonstrating how one twin with her eyes covered can somehow recognize what she can't see because the other twin is looking at it.
That's what they believe. Yeah.
That's what they believe. And then you made a point of like, listen to how Tatiana, I believe her name is, the little girl, when she answers, it's sort of questioning.
Yeah.
Like she's not sure.
Yeah.
So then, yeah, okay.
I mean, there's a lot we don't know. So we don't know how many options there were. Like, is there a piggy and a bear and that's it, or are there a dozen dolls that she could have shown this girl? We don't know if the piggy is her favorite doll, and so this clearly is not a controlled scientific experiment.
Yeah,
It's an interesting anecdote, and it's convinced
okay.
the family and it's convinced their doctor. But we just have to be careful. Even in this 60 minutes piece, when they cover it, they say the thalamic bridge allows all kinds of stuff to cross over, not just sensory data, but they say ideas and all that. Um, and even this doctor that we're hearing from says we don't know that yet. It's
Okay,
possible, he thinks, and he's excited to test it. But
okay.
even he admits that we don't know it. Yeah.
And that was in the 80s.
Oh no, this is more
Oh,
recent. This
oh, this is
Yeah, what was in the 80s was Michael Gazzaniga
oh,
doing the
Gazzaniga,
split brain
sorry.
research. Yeah, that
Okay,
video, he's continued to do the research, but that video is from the 80s.
okay,
And
so this is more recent.
this is about 10 years old, I think. And yeah, so good. So McCade, go ahead, please.
Yeah, I kind of had a similar question. Just based on like how it would expand to other experiences that they would have. Like, would they share experiences of pain? Would they share experiences of like, I don't know, tasting some dish of food that's really good?
So there is anecdotes. There are anecdotes of one twin loves pickles and the other one doesn't. And it's written it's kind of frustrating to read because it's written in such a way that it's not clear that they're whether they're claiming that the twin can taste it or the twin just doesn't like it, right?
Mhm.
Huge. I mean, it's such a huge issue, right? If one twin can taste what the other twin can taste, that's very interesting. But if they're just making the point that one twin likes pickles and the other one doesn't, that is, that's just the case for
Yeah.
siblings, even twins. Yeah. So
Okay.
that's why I'm always hesitant because what happens is there's when you look into this, there are people making these claims, and when you look for the support's not yet there. Yeah. Okay. Yasmin, go ahead.
So just made me think of another question. So I know there have been studies done on twins that are not do not have a shared thalamic
Yeah.
bridge. So they're just twins, right? And there have been studies about like how there's so many similarities
Yeah.
between twins. So then it's sort of wonder like, is it a similar situation with this that it isn't necessarily that they can share each other's thoughts, but that because I don't know, I'm not making sense here. They're so similar in some ways that they just kind of have an understanding of certain things. I don't know. I just like I'm trying to
Maybe
figure trying
so.
to
Maybe
just
Yasmin, you're saying that because they're twins, they share a lot of dispositions,
I
and
guess
because they
so,
share
yeah.
in sharing those dispositions, that might make it look like they're communicating neurally between their brains when actually they just have.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think we have to be careful of that too. Yeah.
Okay.
Just making sure that this sensationalist coverage um, uh, doesn't convince us of things that we don't yet have good reason to believe.
Oh, yeah,
Uh,
that's a really good
and
point.
and I'm but you know, if there's a neural connection between the brains, then we do have good reason to think that information's going back and forth. And then the question is, what's it like, right?
Yeah,
And what kind of information is that?
yeah,
Uh,
okay.
yeah. Layla says my grandma and her twin did a study at their school based on sharing consciousness. Layla, that's interesting. Do you want to elaborate?
Yeah, sure. So my grandma and her twin, when they were younger in elementary school, I guess they had a lot of twins at their school, so they just kind of did like a fun study where they would separate the two twins. They'd have one in one room and one in the other, and they'd show them like shapes or numbers, and the other one would have to guess what the other one was being shown. And my grandma and her twin actually won. They got the best scores out of everybody, so I just thought that
Oh,
was interesting.
that is. Now that would be evidence of some kind of psychic phenomena. Do you happen to remember what their rate was? Their, how many correct?
I don't. I know they're really
Okay.
young, but they always talk about it, so
Yeah, that would be so. That's also uh, a topic that we have to be really careful with. So I think I mentioned this back when we were talking about William James, but scientists in James's time, around the turn of the century, and in the early first half of the 20th century, um, people who were otherwise quite critical and like to pride themselves on thinking objectively and so on, were convinced by some of the experiments in psychic phenomena. And um, part of that taught us to make better experiments because we didn't realize the extent to which the researchers themselves might be very subtly communicating information to the subjects. We didn't know how important it was to have double blind tests. And so when you um, make the research stricter, some of those exciting results go away. There's still some, there are still some uh, experiments with remarkable outcomes, but they have plenty of critics as well. Uh, Chris, and by the way, someone took their hand down, so I want to invite you to come back. Krizia says, oh, thanks, Lucas. I recognize that. Okay. My twin sister and I usually follow similar patterns like do groceries or the same chore on the same day, even though she lives in LA and I live in San Francisco. Yeah. There are some amazing similarities. Even twins that were separated at birth, where they like the same brand of peanut butter, they buy the same kind of toothpaste, and right, there are a lot of even people that just they didn't even know about each other, and they're reunited. Okay, Jerome, go ahead, please.
You were talking about how in the early 2000s, how there was a lot of phenomena or a lot of experiments that were talking about a lot of, I guess, like kind of psychic things and are more,
1900s is what I meant, the turn of the previous century.
yeah, okay, 1900s and all of
Yeah,
that. Okay, okay. Well, I know like certain time periods, I know like when they're talking about scientists or a lot of things, they are influenced by like the time period of, a lot of other things that are going on around that time. So I guess like around that time when people were more I guess when those kind of, I guess, fantastical things, think people were more worried about witches and things of that nature
yeah.
at the time, then those things didn't seem as far-fetched to say like, okay, we have these psychic powers and things like that, or maybe not psychic powers, but there's these more
Well,
fantastical things going on.
good. So someone like William James or take Alan Turing, they both were convinced. So Alan Turing was a mathematician and one of the first computer scientists, basically. We're going to learn more about him. And I think I can safely say they did not believe in witches, ghosts in the kind of original sense. But both of them were very impressed by some of the things that psychics could do, and yet the the experiments weren't as rigorous as they now are. And if you're a fan of psychic phenomena, then you might be let down to discover that once they make the experiments more rigorous, the interesting connections tend to go away. Uh, okay, I'm sorry, in a direct message, do they share the same brain or have two brains? Is it impossible for them to have surgery? So they have two brains. distinct brains joined by a thalamic bridge, if you're asking about the twins. And it's probably, I've read statements that there's no way they can be separated. One of them, one heart is doing the work for both bodies. And then there's this thalamic bridge. And so I think I think everyone has agreed that it would be very risky and very irresponsible to try to separate them. Lucas, go ahead.
Sort of dovetailing off of the conversation here is that I wanted to kind of touch on like if the twins are having like overlapping pathways and like having the same like shared conscious experiences, can they provide proof of like how once one brain's signals are being sent to the other, so therefore like we can somehow like have evidence that like our brains can send signals to other brains like without having that connector piece, like, or is it always going to be like you need to have that connector piece to like make it so that this type of development in human consciousness is prevalent? Like you need to have two brains connected this way to sort of like make a shared conscious experience real, if that makes sense, like if it is real.
Good. Yeah, it's an interesting question. So I think the scientific consensus is going to be that you need some kind of connection, and it's in this case it's neural. But we have there's been some early work on allowing brains to send signals through wires, cables, or Wi-Fi. And so the last time I looked into this was not too long ago. It's a very early stage research, but there were two people who were able to send a message about whether a pattern was vertical or horizontal. And so one person would notice whether it was vertical or horizontal, and there'd be a gadget that allowed neural activity to be transmitted to another person's brain, and the other person would apparently with reliability say whether it was vertical or horizontal. So that's a case where you don't have you have an actual signal sent. And they've been interested in this for a long time. It has implications for all kinds of things, but it starts. The research starts with people who are paralyzed because they're trying to extend neural signals to the body. But now, yeah, we're making some advancement on brains communicating through gadgets. Yeah. Now, if we ever get good evidence of psychic phenomena, that would revolutionize what we know about physics. That would require some, I think, pretty substantial change to physics, right? Because the energy levels seem, I mean, the energy required for one brain to change another brain's state seems to prohibit it as a plausible, phenomenon. Really interesting. So I think I want to play a little bit more.
A baby.
That's right, Mommy's holding the piggy.
Goodness me. Here's how it works. The girls have completely separate brains and personalities, but their brain stems are connected by what's called a thalamic bridge. The thalamic bridge is like a high-speed...
Sorry, we've already seen this part.
Sets, okay, but that there's a cable that's running between the two of them, and even though you can watch channel 2 over here and you can watch channel 4 over here, every once in a while this one can turn on the station that this one is watching and tune into it.
That looks really tasty. That's a good looking cheese sandwich.
When they tune in, how they do, why they tune into each other, are some of the myriad of questions that Dr. Todd Feinberg would love answered.
In order for it to work, the one side, which functions quite independently most of the time from the other side, this one needs to tune into the channel that the other one is watching most of the time in order to get what the other one is seeing or experiencing. there are other times, perhaps when one is a little tired or distracted, that it spontaneously leaks over. So one will taste something that the other one is eating when they really don't want to.
Can you see your sister?
Yeah, and then
Is she pretty?
yeah.
Now, with the girls starting school this year, a new wide world will open up for them.
Is she special to you?
And for researchers, as they explore the potential of these two beautiful minds to not just share feelings, but detailed thoughts, even knowledge.
At Folio Society,
Oh, sorry
every
about that.
book begins with obsession. Every page is designed.
Knowledge.
We know now that they can share sensations. The question will be, as they mature and we get to explore it a little more clearly, would it be conceivable that one side could think of a tiger, and the other girl would be able to say tiger, for example?
So this is what I mentioned. So Dr. Todd Feinberg is saying we simply don't know whether thoughts can be shared. But in the 60 minutes presentation, they make it sound like all this information, including thoughts, can cross over the thalamic bridge. Okay, just a little bit more.
Well, that would really be scientifically a breakthrough and an amazing observation. It would change a lot of the way we think about consciousness, for example, if that were the case.
For all their scientific wonder, it's difficult not to worry about Krista and Tatiana's future. And at the local park, we saw how tough the stares and taunts can be.
I don't pay attention to it. They are stuck together.
Do you know what that's called? It's called conjoined twins. Yeah.
That's really creepy.
The world is cruel to us sometimes, and sometimes it's okay. And that's just the way it is.
Knowing their personalities now, how are they going to handle all of that, do you think?
Well, I think Krista's going to be the mouthy one, and she's going to be telling people off. Whereas I think Tatiana will try and smother it with love.
Yeah. Any final thoughts before moving on? Alomaisi, if I've pronounced it right, says if the conjoined twins have hearts and lungs that are able to function on their own, does that mean they can successfully be separated, or do they also have separate brains or just separately functioning brains to some extent only? So yeah, this was addressed previously. They have separate hearts and all that, but one heart is doing the work for both bodies. I don't know what that means for the other heart. I just know that that's what they report. And so it looks like if they were separated, it would be very risky. That's what everyone agrees on. And again, you'd be cutting that thalamic bridge, and that could itself be risky. So Gustavo says, if true, the claim is in favor of physicalism. Dualism is fake, and we need and indeed we are a computer. If true, I don't know, Gustavo, what claim you're addressing, saying if that's true. But yeah, I don't know. You can type more if you want. Do we know where these twins are now? Yes, and there's a video that I found that I haven't followed up on that addresses the same set of issues. So maybe they've done some research. I think if they had, I would have come across it by now. But maybe there are more interesting anecdotes in this video, this follow-up video, and now that they're older. And physically, where are they? I think they're in college at this point, somewhere. I don't know where. Probably, if that's public information, it's surely easy to find. Good. Okay. So this was something that some of us in philosophy of mind have been thinking about since long before there was a case. So there are conjoined twins, but this is especially interesting because not only are they craniopagus, meaning joined at the cranium, but They're separate, different, independent brains are joined by this connection that doctors are telling us is neural and that allows information to cross over in both directions. Okay, so there will be an assignment on that, a discussion question on that, but we're not going to do it in class. And we're going to move on to some basic ideas that you find in neuroscience. And so the optional chapter is called Neurological Background. Again, it's optional, so you don't have to read it. And there's a section in there on perceptrons that we will get to later. So we're not covering it right now, but we are covering the Macaulay-Pitts neuron, which was the first attempt to provide a kind of a logical model of what a neuron might be doing. And this was inspired by the interesting fact that brains seem to be about things in the world. They represent things in the world. Not everyone accepts this. Behaviorists didn't want to talk about mental representation, but most of us say, well, when I look at the tree outside my window, I'm representing it with my brain. So there's a state in my brain, and it's about let me get my camera back on. There's a state in my brain, and it's about the tree, and I can perform operations on this. It's a mental representation, and I can imagine the tree when it was younger and smaller, and I can imagine the tree losing its leaves, as we're going through fall. I can imagine it getting chopped down. I can imagine it growing bigger, right? So I'm performing operations on this, and it's not just a matter of what I sense. I'm just doing that in my head. So it seems like that new representation of the larger tree is in some sense about that tree out there. So we have this intentionality, this aboutness. Brains can be about the world. And in some sense, that's obvious to most people. I think you have to be in the grip of an ideology to say that that's false. Yet, what else in the world, in the whole universe that we know of, is about anything? What else is about anything? Well, you can find you can get information from things, right? You can look at a tomato that's growing in a garden and learn that there's not enough. What is it? I always forget the element. There's not enough of something in the soil. I always forget what that is. When the tomato has a soft, kind of rotting bottom part. You can learn that. You can look at the rings of a tree and figure out how old a tree is with a pretty good approximation. But even then, we don't think that the tree is representing its age in the same way that the brain represents states of affairs and objects. So the question is, we know the brain boils down to neurons, and we've known this for a while now. And theorists started asking, and researchers started asking, how do these units of the brain work so that they can process information about the world? How can they be about the world? We want to know how these things that just arise in nature, biological things, and the states that they can have, how can they be meaningful? That's the idea. Okay. So let's think about representation. In English, the word dog means something. The word walk means something, right? And it's a sound, but then also on the screen, it's some squiggles. And the answer is probably pretty arbitrary. At some point long ago, someone made a certain sound in an attempt to refer to a dog, and it probably evolved over time and morphed. And here we all are saying dog whenever we want to refer to dogs in English. And same goes for walk. So there's this kind of arbitrary connection that we just all agree on. That's how the squiggle on the screen comes to represent the animal. It seems arbitrary. We just match things up. And it's we who decide this, right? And we agree. If all English speakers today decided let's stop using dog to refer to dogs, let's make another word. And dog will now refer to frying pan or something. Well, if we wanted to do that, we could, right? There's no intrinsic connection, it seems. Now let's look at the map of San Francisco. Can someone tell us how does the map of San Francisco represent San Francisco? In the chat, I see Jerome says, are you saying Doge or dog? Did you misspell it? It's true that words have changed, so uh okay, you mean Doge. Okay. And Grace says it's a peninsula. So, words have changed meaning over time. Like the word meat used to just mean food in general. Um, and girl has an interesting history. So at one point, it was used to refer to the knight's helper, like a knight, in the medieval times. And the knight's helper was typically a boy. More than typically, I think always. And if you want to elaborate either Grace or Jerome, go ahead. But I mean, this just highlights the arbitrariness of language. Now, Madeline says the map of San Francisco is a bird's eye view of San Francisco and its roads. I think that's a pretty good answer, right? And so it's not arbitrary, right? You could see, we can't be criticized if on why dog means dog, and we could make up a new word for dog, and there would be nothing wrong with doing that if we switched. But if you change the map of San Francisco and you put Golden Gate Park somewhere else on the map, then it no longer, at least successfully, represents the city, right? So there's got to be more than just we decide to match them up. It's got to be more than that. Jerome, go ahead.
I was talking about Doge earlier, and originally Doge, people would spell dog with an E at the end. And it was, I don't know, I'm assuming people would pronounce it as Doge. It's one of those things, it was just a meme. And you would always see it written out online. And I don't know if people would just be like, oh, look at the Doge or look at this funny Doge. Like it didn't really mean
Yeah.
anything. It was just the way that people spelled dog. And it just was a popular meme. And then Elon Musk, kind of took the term and made it the Department of Government Efficiency.
Yeah.
With air quotes.
Yeah.
And now when you hear Doge, it doesn't have the same meaning as it did beforehand.
I see. Right. And strictly the word existed prior to that, and it was a title, like in that painting of Galileo that I shared many classes ago, where he's showing someone how to use a telescope. The person that he's showing is called the Doge of Venice, and it's spelled the same way. And I don't know what that is, but it's like being something like a bishop or something. Yeah. Thanks.
You're head of the state.
Doge is head of the state.
I just looked it up real quick.
Yeah. Thanks, Lucas. Okay. And good. So the map of San Francisco has to have some kind of isomorphism, like it's got to have the right shapes in the right places, related in the right way. So if you're going to represent, with north at the top, you're going to have the Pacific Ocean to the left, so you're going to have some blue to the left, and then you're going to have this green rectangle that's horizontal, going east-west, and that's going to represent Golden Gate Park, and there's going to be the little panhandle area of the park, so it's not going to be a perfect rectangle, blah, 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 right? So you need some kind of preservation of structure, okay? And then thermometers and speedometers well, someone tell me, how does a thermometer represent, and what does it represent exactly? in the chat. Bobby Ray writes, kind of reminds me of how we call pigs ham or pork, cows beef. This came up in my critical thinking class. We're talking about euphemisms. To change the value of the word to associate it with food instead of an animal. That's true. And this is apparently something that happens in most languages. So we distinguish between, so although sometimes you have the same word, like with fish, you eat fish and you see the fish swimming. Uh, but right, we don't tend to, unless we're trying to be ironic or something, say like that we're eating cow, right? We're eating beef, not cow. Yes. Yasmin, go ahead.
I was just going to say back to your question about a thermometer. So,
Yeah.
I mean, it's a tool to measure temperature, right? Or heat.
Mm-hmm. Temperature but how, let's think of the one that uses a column of mercury.
Right.
The higher the column is, the what?
The higher the temperature.
Yeah, the higher the temperature, which is vibration of molecules, basically.
Mm-hmm.
And so we have this, I mean, the temperature doesn't get higher. The molecules don't get, the air doesn't go higher, right? There's no, like, there's a one-to-one correspondence between the height of the mercury in the column and the rate at which molecules vibrate, right?
Okay.
And then thank you, Yasmin. And then the speedometer, let's think of a needle that, goes from left to right. That there's a one-to-one correspondence between the position of the needle and how fast the wheels are spinning, right? And so here we have some preservation of structure, but it's completely different, right? Or think of notes, musical notes on a page, right? The higher the note is on the what are those called? Cleps, anyways, in those bars, the higher the frequency of the sound is, right? So we have a principled one-to-one correspondence, but the two things are very different, right? And which is not the case with the map, because the map, you have the same shapes. One's on paper and one's an actual building or street or whatever. You have the same shapes in correspondence. So I just want to get you all thinking about this, like how representation may or may not work. Notice that in some cases it seems to depend on intentions. Like we intend to use dog in a principled way, and we intend to use the map in a certain way. So it might depend on intentions to an extent. In other cases, it might depend on shapes, or it might depend on certain one-to-one correspondences. And there's a lot of literature in philosophy of mind. It's called mental representation. And even more broadly, there's a lot of literature in the question of representation, because even if you step away from mental representations, we have like scientific models that represent things like the solar system or the hydrogen atom or something. And it turns out there's a lot of weird issues and questions that come up when we discuss representation. And so what McCulloch and Pitts were doing back in the 1940s is they were saying, okay, let's see if we can model the neuron in a way that's biologically plausible, if an oversimplification, if admittedly it's maybe in some ways an oversimplification and maybe an abstraction, but let's see if we can think of them as things that can be about the world. They can be about other things. And so they came up with the McCulloch-Pitts neuron in the 1940s. They call this an MP neuron or McCulloch-Pitts neuron. And here it is. It should remind you of the biological neuron. So you have the cell body here, and you have what you could think of as dendrites feeding input into the cell body. And then you have some function that determines whether you get activation, and then you have output. In this case, the output is either 0 or 1. And so this is their attempt to take something biologically real and think of it abstractly and in an admittedly simplified way to see how they could think of it as as processing information. and being about something out there in the world. Okay, so let's think of it mathematically now. You have all these inputs, and look at number one up here, W sub zero. That's an inhibitor. Okay, so if that is active, the whole thing shuts down. Okay, that's the second bullet. If an input is an inhibition, then the neuron does not fire. Period. But otherwise, if it's not being inhibited, then you get signals, inputs that are weighted. So X1, X2, all the way to Xn. So X1 might have an activation of 1 or 0, X2, 1 or 0, etc. And then you have weights. And the weight could be like 0.7. So 1 times 0.7 is 0.7, right? Or the weight could maybe be 2.3 or something, or just 2. So 1 times 2 is 2, so you double it. And all those weighted inputs, a weighted input is just two numbers multiplied to each together. So you have the activation and the weight. You multiply it, and the product goes in here, and you sum that up. You sum it up. And if it's not being inhibited, then that number is compared to the activation function. In this case, the activation function is a threshold. And if the sum here meets or exceeds the threshold, then you have an output of 1. Otherwise, you have an output of 0. And that's all this thing is doing, is just taking weighted input, and that gets added up. So mathematically, you're just taking, for every input, you have two numbers, you multiply them together. It's the activation and the weight, right? You multiply them together, and for each one, then you take all those products and add them up. And then you ask, does that meet or exceed the threshold? Is it greater than or equal to the threshold? And if the answer is yes, and it's not being inhibited, then you get an output of 1. That's it. Now, the McCulloch-Pitts neuron evolves over time. So if you look up a tutorial on the McCulloch-Pitts neuron, you might get something that has a slight variation, right? So whether the person allows the activations to be other than 0 and 1 depends on when McCulloch and Pitts were discussing their McCulloch-Pitts neuron. Okay, how inhibition is treated also seems to vary, and then the activation function here can be other than a threshold, but originally it was just a threshold. Okay, so I'm just saying that just be careful if you go look at another tutorial on the McCulloch-Pitts neuron and you see something different than here, that could just be because it kind of they had different versions of them over time. People who are not familiar with these symbols, this just means summation. So add these together. These W's are tagged with 0, 1, 2, all the way to N. So that just means weight, right? And then over here you would read this F of something, and a function of the sum. So here's the sum, and whether you get a 1 or a 0 as output is a function of that sum. And the question is simply, does the sum meet or exceed the threshold? So if the threshold is 2 and the sum is 1.9, then it does not meet or exceed the threshold. The output is 0. If it's 2.3, then it does exceed the threshold. And so as long as it's not being inhibited, the output is 1, not 2.3, 1. Jerome says, what would an example of an inhibitor be? So right now we just mean there's a signal coming in there's an inhibitor that when it's active shuts down the neuron, and that's it. Now, in fact, neurons do inhibit each other. And so you can show that, you have neuron A and B, and let's say A inhibits B. So maybe B is receiving a lot of signals and it would be firing, except A inhibits it, makes it not fire, even though it's receiving enough signals to fire otherwise. Why do we have inhibition? Well, neurons sometimes compete in a way. And so in vision processing, sometimes you want to detect contrast. And so sometimes inhibition makes that easier. I'll just leave it at that. Okay, so I'm highlighting the take-home message. So what they showed in their original 1943 paper, which I can add as an optional paper for those interested, they show that the response of any neuron is factually equivalent to a proposition which proposed its adequate stimulus. What does that mean? Well, if a neuron is firing, it's saying something. So look down at P1 prime. Every neuron can be assigned a proposition of the form, the conditions for my activation are now met. The conditions for my activation are now met. And the conditions for that activation can be quite complex. In this case, the condition for this activation is it's summed up a number that is equal to or greater than the threshold, and it's not being inhibited. For that to occur, there are a bunch of different options, a bunch of different ways that X1, X2, all the way to Xn can be activated. So their approach to trying to answer this question, how a neuron can be about something, is to say neurons are either active or not. And when they're active, what we can glean from that is that there are certain conditions in the world that must hold so that the neuron can be active. So let's step away from neurons and let's just imagine that you're looking at a ceiling lamp, and ceiling lamps are not made to represent anything. They're just made to shed light in the room so you can see. Okay. But you can think of this as telling you something about something else in the room. So when the light is on, you can think of it as saying the conditions for its activation have been met. And what are the conditions for its activation? You walk into a room, notice the light is on. What else do you know about something in the room? Yasmin?
I don't know. Are you asking like what has to be done to activate it?
Yeah, that's it.
I just flip the switch.
Yeah, the switch is in a certain position, right? Grace says switch being turned. Otavia says electricity, the light switch. Right. So notice that there are different ways you could answer this. You could say, well, given that the house has electricity, then I know that the light switch is on. But if you don't accept that condition, then you say, well, the fact that the light switch is on, I'm sorry, the fact that the light is glowing means that the switch is on and the house is electrified. Okay, so this is simply telling you the conditions for its activation have been met, and let's assume that the house has electricity. Then all you're being told is that the light switch is in the on position. Okay, so that's what they're doing with neurons. And that's their attempt to assign or to recognize meaning in what a neuron is doing. And that's something you can extend to artificial neurons. So we do now have artificial neural networks. We have these large language models, and we have vision, image classifiers, and we have all this artificial intelligence now. And the background assumption made by virtually everyone is that these little nodes, which are like neurons, are either active or not. And in many cases, they're active in a graded way. So it's not just ones and zeros, right? And that it's that activity and the conditions that activity is about the conditions that brought it about. Okay, so what would be an example? So in the eye, we have and in vision processing, we have neurons that seem to be responsible for edges. So if there is a shape out there, we have neurons that are extremely, they become activated whenever an edge is present. We have neurons that are active whenever there's contrast or when there's something circular, right? So we talk about like edge detectors, contrast detectors, and we're going to learn about one of the early papers on that. And so you can say, well, the edge detector's conditions for activation are there is an edge out there in the visual field somewhere. Checking the time. Okay, good. And so they're recognizing for every neuron a proposition. It might be a very complex one, or it might be quite simple. Let's look at some examples. Okay, this is this is going to represent two McCulloch-Pitts neurons, and one is an OR net. You might also call it an OR neuron, but OR net, and the other one is an AND net. Okay, and we have tables representing these logical functions. So we have the OR and the AND net, and each one that they're over here, and these are the tables representing them, takes input values of 0 or 1 from the circuits A and B. And each provides an output of either 0 or 1 at a given time. To be an OR net, the input-output relations of the McCulloch-Pitts neuron need to match those on the truth table here, and I haven't completed the table. Now, don't worry, I'm not going to make you do stuff, but I'm curious. Green checks if you've taken logic, symbolic logic. And so you've seen truth tables for OR, for AND, etc. I'm just curious how many people out there have seen this. Okay, I'm going to try to make it pretty intuitive. And so far, I think we just have one person. Okay, thank you. I'm going to clear that. So I'm going to give the person who gave us a green check a little bit of a warning. In a logic class in a philosophy department, you use T's and F's for true and false. And in the computer science department, they tend to use zeros and ones. 0 for false, 1 for true. Okay. But because they use zeros and ones, they end up filling out the table in a different order. They start with false, false, and they end with true, true. In other words, they start with 0, 0, and they end with 1, 1. So just keep that in mind. If you learn to do truth tables in your typical symbolic logic class, you learn to start with TT and end with FF. And in numbers, that would be 1, 1, be going down to 0, 0. But in computer science, they flip it. So what do you get? Okay. The left-hand side tells you all the logical possibilities for both A and B. It could be that both A and B are off, 0, 0. It could be that A is off and B is on, 0, 1, etc. Okay, those are all the logical possibilities. And remember, 0 is false and 1 is true. So let's let A stand for Amy is home. That's some house. Amy is home. And let B be Beth is home. Okay. So in the first case, 0, 0, neither of them are home. And in the third case, Amy is home, but Beth is not. Okay. Now, someone calls the house and says, is either Amy or Beth home? There are 4 possibilities listed here. And for each one, there's an answer to that question. So in the first possibility, neither of them are home. So the answer should be no. In the second case, one of them is home, so the answer should be yes. So we're going to have a 0 followed by a 1. And then in logical possibility 3, row 3, we're also going to have 1. And what do we do when they're both home? So imagine that I call up and go, is either Amy or Beth home? And you look and they're both home. What would you say? Yes or no? It would be weird if you said no, right? Uh, right. I'm not saying, is it the case that either one or the other is home, but not both? I didn't say that, right? So we call this the inclusive or. It includes the possibility that both are home. Now, if you, in normal conversation, you'd say, yeah, they're both home. Which one do you want to talk to, right? But if all you have is a yes or no, then it's going to look like this. 0, 1, 1, 1. Okay? That's how OR works, or at least that's how inclusive OR works. Now, there is exclusive OR, and that does mean but not both. So you say either this or that, but not both. So the rabbit took the left trail or the right trail, but not both, because the rabbit can't split in half. You know, it's not like a quantum particle. It's not a saint. Saints supposedly can co-locate. I think it's called show up in different areas. Okay. So in that case, you say not both. But typically when we use or, the default is to treat it as inclusive. Okay. Now let's look at the and net. And the left columns are going to be exactly the same. Whenever you have two inputs or two circuits, two propositions, Amy is home, Beth is home, it will always look like that. 0, 0, 0, 1, 1, 0, 1, 1. But the column to the right, which you don't yet see, it better be different because and is different than or, right? Can someone tell me what the column would look like? What do you think it should look like, given the way we use the English word and? You can just type it into the chat. It's not going to be 0, 1, 1, 1. It's going to be a different string of zeros and ones. So I call and I say, okay, so McCade gave us an answer. Otavia and Pal, good. You've all got it right. That's exactly right. So the only time that if I say, is it the case that both Amy and Beth are home? The only time you should say yes is if it's true that Amy is home and it's true that Beth is home. Okay, good. Okay, so those are the two operations we want to capture with these neurons over here. But no, right now, we haven't filled in any details. And so the question is, what can we do to this neuron in the upper left to make it behave like an OR net? And the answer is we set the threshold. We give it a certain threshold. Now, right now, we don't have weighted connections. So A either produces a 0 or a 1. B either produces a 0 or a 1. What should the threshold be? The threshold could be 0, it could be 0.5, it could be 0.7, it could be 1, it could be 2, it could be 1.5, right? But you want a threshold such that it produces a 1 in cases 2, 3, and 4, and it produces a 0 in the first case. Does that make sense? And so, does anyone want to guess the threshold? Look at case 2. Amy is not home and Beth is home. So the sum is going to be 1. And Grace is writing 1 with a question mark. Is the threshold 1? Well, if we set the threshold to 1, then let's just go down the list. When it's false that Amy is home and it's false that Beth is home, you've got 0, 0. 0 plus 0 equals 0. That does not meet or exceed Grace's threshold of 1. So the output is 0. Okay. In case 2, though, you have 1. 1 does meet or exceed the threshold of 1 because it meets 1. So the output's going to be 1. So far, so good. Grace, are you now more confident in your answer? Oh, I thought you would be. Okay, so good job. The answer is absolutely 1. And as I asked the question, I felt like the question might not have been as clear to everyone, but I hope it's clear now. The appropriate threshold for getting this neuron to act like an OR net is 1. So whenever you have 1 or more as a sum, that's in cases 2, 3, and 4, then it will produce an output of 1. The only time it doesn't produce an output of 1 is when it gets 0, 0. How would we explain the fourth row? The fourth row, both circuits are activated. So A provides a 1, B provides a 1. What's the sum? It's 1 plus 1, 2. Does 2 meet or exceed the threshold? Yes, it exceeds the threshold. And so the output is 1. Yeah, good. But I know this raises, just from experience, I know this raises questions and can be confusing. All this table represents is the different logical possibilities, whether something is active or not, 0 or 1. And then we have this rule that says the McCulloch-Pitts neuron sums its input. So in case 1, 0, 0 is just 0. In case 2, 0, 1 is 1. 1, 0, that's also 1. 1, 1, that's 2. Okay, so you get a sum of those two numbers. And then the question is that equal to or greater than the threshold? If it's equal to or greater than the threshold, the output is 1. If it's not, the output is 0. So an OR net has a threshold of 1, which means that all it takes to make it give an output of 1 is an input that totals 1. Yeah. A alone could make it yield an output of 1, right? B alone could do it. And if they both provide 1, then that exceeds the threshold. And that's just how the English OR works. Now, what threshold should we set the AND net to? Because it's not going to be 1. If it's 1, then it's going to act like an OR net. So we have to think of a threshold where it's active only in case 4, only when both A and B are active, when you get 1 and 1. So what's the threshold going to be in that case? Now I'm getting some answers. I got a 3 and a 0. Well, if the threshold is 0, then it's going to be active even when it's getting no input. So you don't want that, because that's, no one's home. And I say, are they both home? And you'd say yes. So we don't want that. And then 3 is going to be too high, because if they're both home, you have A1, B1, that adds to 2, but that doesn't meet or exceed 3. So you get 0, but you want a 1. And Linda says 2, and that is in fact the right answer. So when the threshold is 2, you're only going to get an output of 1 when both A and B are active. In case 4, 1, 1. 1 plus 1 is 2. That meets the threshold of 2. So it meets or exceeds the threshold of 2. So you get an output of 1. Okay? Now, there are a bunch of other neurons. There's, for example, majority net. So a majority net for 3 items, this could be about, Amy, Beth, and Charles, right? And I say, out of Amy, Beth, and Charles, is the majority of them home? So what's the majority? Well, it could be Amy and Beth, but not Charles. It could be Amy and Charles, but not Beth, right? It's going to be 2 out of 3, right? So what would the threshold be for this majority net on the left? What would the threshold be? The answer of 3 is going to be too strong because 2 out of 3 is already a majority. So when 2 of these circuits are active, the output should be 1. So like a majority out of 3 items is 2 or more. And a majority out of 5 items is 3 or more. So it's always got to be above half. Anyone want to try again? Try to give the threshold for majority net? It is 2. Good. So right here, the threshold is 2. So whenever 2 or more inputs are providing ones, right, you're going to have, it's going to reach the threshold of 2 and it will say, yes, a majority are home. So it will provide an output of 2. Now on the right, we have A, B, C, D. So we have 4 items. And what's a majority out of 4? It's not 2. That's not a majority. That's half. It's 3. So the threshold, Otavia, needs to be 3. Okay. And there are a bunch of other nets. There's even a not net, which doesn't use the arrow. It uses inhibition, which is that little ring, that little circle. Okay. So in addition to excitation, we have inhibition. And an inhibitory circuit has this empty circle right here instead of an arrowhead to represent that. So when A's value is 1, when A is activated, the neuron yields an output of 0. It works like not works, right? And when A's value is 0, the net yields 1 because its threshold is 0, and that means it's met. This is the one that ties people's heads up in knots, okay? The not net is active when A is inactive. Okay, so if Amy is not home, then A is inactive. And so the statement, Amy is not home, is true. So this not net detects when Amy is not home. Checking the time. Okay, so I'm going to back up. The majority net up here on the left is saying a majority of those 3 are home. Whenever it's active, whenever it produces a 1 output, it's saying a majority of them are home. The one over here on the right is saying a majority out of the 4 are home. Okay. And the one down here is saying Amy is not home. Whenever it's producing an output of 1, it's saying Amy is not home. Grace asks a good question. What would a not net truth table look like? And this might take us past the end of class, but not by much. And of course, if you need to run off, you're free to go. But to answer your question, the table would only have 2 rows. Annotate, probably don't want to use blue as my color. Okay. So you have A. And since we don't have A and B, we just have A. And that's not A. We have only 0 and 1, right? A is either off or on, and not A, when A is off, then not A is on, and When A is on, then not A is off. Okay, so it's just the opposite. And so when Amy is not home, this thing is saying Amy is not home. The conditions for its activation have been met. Sorry, I know it's hard to read. Okay. And when Amy comes home, then this becomes activated. So it supplies O1, but it's inhibiting. Okay. So it makes sure that um, the output is 0. Okay. I can revisit that next time. It's now 10:45, so we'll leave it there. Okay, I'm gonna clear
Professor,
all
will you
that.
post this video?
Yes.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah. Okay. So that's all for today. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you,
Thank
Professor.
you.